Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement. Today, we have a special edition, which is one of our jam session with one of our proc stars. So super excited to have Jay with us. Jay is a procurement professional for quite a while, and he owns scope that is going to surprise many of you. Really excited for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it. Jay, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I really love to share with people is um, the diverse pathways that people get into procurement. So, tell me how that worked for you. What brought you into procurement? Did you go to school for procurement, or did you just kind of like fall into it?
Yeah, probably more fall into it. I was pretty sure I wanted to be a lawyer, and after all the reading in the first week of college, I decided, yeah, I don't want to do that. And now, of course, what do I do in procurement and real estate? I read contracts all day. Um, so no, I was a math and social science undergrad. And was recruited out of college and joined what at the time was called A.T. Kearney, um, and worked in their financial institutions practice. And most of the work we were doing was sourcing work, and found that I really enjoyed it. For me, the first couple of projects were actually real estate related sourcing for financial institution clients,
Yeah.
which over the years led me in a few other directions on the real estate front, where now I'm managing both procurement and real estate here at Hub International.
Well, we see that from time to time with procurement and real estate coming together like that. That's awesome, and to be able to jump into that kind of, I think it's Kearney now, right? Like they dropped
Yeah,
the
they
A.
dropped the A and the T.
I don't know if A&T retired or what happened there, but we have a lot of friends over at Kearney still. So
Yeah.
so yeah, so you kind of didn't anticipate getting into procurement, but they hired you into that consulting role, and then that was your welcome. Was
Yeah,
it
it was.
straight from there,
I
straightforward into procurement, or?
Well, I would say, as I recall the recruiting process, there was a lot of talk about strategy work, no talk about procurement work, and a lot of us when we came in were, Carney was one of the OGs of sourcing, so it was a great place to learn. It's one of those places, and I love experiences like this. Um, I like when I'm the dumbest guy in the room, because everything you hear and observe from the people that are around you. If you can be a sponge, and if you can be thoughtful enough to shut up and listen, right, what you can learn just being around people who are experts, people who are more experienced, right, is more valuable to me than say a classroom session in maybe the same material. So while I was brought into what was generally the financial institutions group, and we were doing a lot of work for banks and insurance companies, and there was certainly strategy and other operational work happening. A lot of work was happening on the sourcing front, and for businesses like that had grown rapidly through acquisition. A lot of the work I did was for banks that were, I would call it post-merger integration, right? But not just one bank buying another, or one taking over one branch, right? These massive banking networks taking over others, and at some point they were 3 and 4 integrations, the 3 and 4 acquisitions in, but they hadn't truly integrated them and really leveraged the benefit of what most of us would consider sourcing 101.
Yeah. So you were schooled and learned like sourcing from the experts. What a great way to kind of start into procurement that way. So now you're the big boss of real estate procurement more broadly here at Hub International. I want to talk a little bit more about what that looks like, and the business itself. But what would you say were the stepping stones that kind of helped prepare you from that first introduction into procurement via sourcing to kind of go, okay, I've kind of got that rounded experience. Obviously, you talked about real estate, but for
Yeah,
those,
I think
that are trying to figure out their career, like looking back, how would you think about guiding them?
Right. I think the next the next aha moment for me was probably when I left Carney and went to work for Waste Management, where they were starting up a sourcing function within the firm. Having to then be on, at Carney, one of the things we didn't necessarily have the benefit of, which I learned very quickly at Waste Management, we would effectively source a deal, get it inked, hand it over to the client, and we either walked out the door or we started working on the next sourcing project. At Waste Management, I actually had to live with the contracts after I got them done. And there were a whole bunch of things that I started to think about or started to think about at that point in the cycle that I hadn't as a, very, very green consultant. That was definitely one of those light bulb moments for me. Like, oh, it's really important to think about how are we going to be invoiced? How are we going to pay? What sort of reporting do we want? You're really spending time on things like service levels and KPIs, not just getting the deal done, but then how are you going to implement it? What's the communication strategy? Who is your coalition of the willing that you need to have along with you to actually put all this great theoretical stuff that you put in a 50-page document into practice and actually recognize those benefits that you originally estimated. So that was that was definitely an eye opener for me and began to change how I thought about it.
Yeah, it's so important, right? I kind of had a similar aha when I was at Intel, which is, I saw team members and even myself reporting cost savings. We sign a contract and go, hey, we got this cost savings. And a lot of times it was the calculation of the cost savings was driven by some consolidation of spend that was, in current state going to several suppliers. And like, oh yeah, look, we saved all this money without actually going and doing the change management to move all of that spend from those 4 or 5 suppliers to consolidate into the one, which in the end, you're projecting some big value. Ultimately, are you achieving the value? And I think, hands-on, kind of more start to finish through the life cycle makes a big difference. You do think about it differently. And ultimately, I think I don't know how many of those early contracts that you did as a third party that the business really went and drove the value that you guys kind of designed or architected.
Yeah.
But when it's yours, like you take it a lot more personally that way. So
absolutely.
yeah. Okay. So you kind of go from an outside player to an inside player. You're doing sourcing, you're doing projects, but your role now, I mean, talk to us about your remit, because there's a lot more involved in what you're doing now than those early steps. So first couple of steps into procurement, and then now you find yourself as the functional, head and lead. So
yeah. So right now I've got both procurement and real estate. Within procurement, I would say it's more like sourcing, right? Where I don't own AP, I don't own third-party risk management. My team helps other teams either not spend money or spend their money more effectively, right? So we generally tend to work on deals. We also have more of a supplier management role in the categories that I would say don't otherwise have a natural home in the organization. So we are primarily insurance brokers, employee benefits brokers, and we provide a whole host of other insurance tangential professional services, retirement and private wealth, everything in that general space. We only do it in the U.S. and Canada, but there are things like our express mail relationship or office supplies, where it's a big number for a firm like ours. We're just shy of 700 offices, 20,000 employees. I think we're a little bit over that, and we grow rapidly through acquisition. So I've been here a little over 10 years. I think when I started, we had about 6,000 employees. We do 5+ acquisitions every month. And it's been that way. It didn't stop during COVID. We've morphed a little bit around what we look for when we make an acquisition, and for a time, I'd say the average acquisition for us was one office and 25 some odd people, but we've done others that are significantly more complicated, where we purchased what was the insurance arm of a bank that had 75 branches, right? So imagine you walk into that branch and you've got tellers, bankers, and one or two people that are insurance experts. Now we've got to extract that or put up a wall or figure out what we do to retain and grow the revenue without necessarily co-locating forever with an entity that we're not a part of. Right. Those are certainly more challenging. But for me, the pace of change has been great. Like if I'm always doing the same thing, I'm the type of person that's going to get incredibly bored. So sometimes it feels like if I morph for a second into the real estate space, if we realign a market, we have multiple offices, we get them consolidated, and we actually have a very good pipeline with our M&A team, so we know what they're looking at, what they're considering. But inevitably, we'll do a 5 or 7 year lease, build out a brand new space, get everyone under one roof, and all of a sudden, wasn't on anyone's radar. An acquisition falls into our lap that's too good to pass up, and now we got 2 offices across the street from each other again. But there's no lack of work here, no lack of opportunity, and so I certainly enjoy it, and I've got a fantastic team that has a great relationship with their stakeholders, which again also makes it a lot easier for us to have an impact on what we're trying to do when folks generally get along with each other.
So just in case listeners out there, you think maybe you didn't hear right, like say that number again. How many acquisitions a month?
5.
Okay, 5 So this is 1 a week, maybe even more than that.
Yeah.
And if you're again, listeners, if you're like me, working in the corporate space, maybe you've been in a place where there's a couple of acquisitions a year, maybe a couple of years without an acquisition. Like this just isn't a, I don't know if in your industry this is normal, but I don't talk to too many people that this is such a big part of their procurement space. So, back at Adobe where I was working, we'd spin up a project. I mean, we'd be pulling people out of sourcing teams. We'd organize this all together. They hadn't, most of them hadn't done a project like that before. It was kind of new. It was almost a one-off, it wasn't, but
Yeah.
It sounds like to do successfully what you're doing, this is a very fundamentally important part of your organization.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I would say from the top down, I mean, there are incentives for everyone to help drive this engine, even in finding acquisition targets. But yeah, I would say generally know the drill. We have a great network of each of the regional entities we call them hubs. So each of those has a CFO, a COO, There's an entire team within our IT organization that's dedicated to M&A integration. So again, folks know each other. There are certain agreements that are easy day one. Hey, we're going to put you on this agreement. We'll set you up with new passwords and off you go. And then there's others where, obviously it's going to take some more time, maybe on certain systems. We've got to get them migrated off of those. There are some businesses we buy that, may be very unique and they operate on a certain platform. And, we may decide to keep that. Although we will work with them as it relates to, okay, well, now that you're part of a broader company where you may get more internal referrals, that may drive up your volume, your consumption, the number of users you have on a given tool. So, we're constantly looking in our agreements. We look for tiered pricing, but tiered pricing up front. Tell me where the brakes are and tell me where they are now. Don't tell me after I cross it, or don't not tell me when I have crossed it. Right. That's something that our team spends a lot of time on. And as we are looking at new firms, it's something that we push during the negotiations, right? Where we tell some of these firms, listen, even if you do nothing, if let's say it's an application and all of our employees use it, if you do nothing, you're going to grow by 10%, 15% year over year due to our acquisition strategy, right? You don't have to hire a salesperson. You don't have to spend any money on marketing. Those companies that hitch their wagon to us and continue to, perform well, offer a good product or service, keep improving it over time, right? They will recognize benefit just by hitching their wagon to us.
Yeah. So that's awesome. And that's got to, sorry. So if I think about your team, do you have people dedicated as you're the M&A person, or everybody just like this is part of your job? This is something
Yeah,
that's coming
it's
constantly.
yeah, it's part of everybody's job. Obviously, right, we've got one or two folks that kind of straddle that that supplier management type function for those more right general categories. Those folks probably touch it a little more often, but the other folk, you're right, certainly the real estate folks are aware of this. And
Yeah.
the folks I've got, the other folks on the procurement side of the house that do a lot of work with our IT organization. This is germane to how we work with suppliers, how we negotiate, right, how we think about an internal stakeholder who comes to us with, hey, I want to try this. All right, well, if we try it and it works, let's think a few steps ahead now, because here's what this is going to mean as the growth starts to explode, as the consumption starts to explode.
Yeah.
Right? Let's not wait until we're there to first have those conversations about pricing, incremental services, support, training, etc. Let's have them now, right? And let's really push that. So yeah, this is like I said, from day one being here, this was happening before I got here. It hasn't stopped. And so it's something that we're just all accustomed to, sort of all hands on deck. And as an organization, yes, we are highly focused on organic growth, but we're also making sure that we are, whether it's filling in gaps in the map, or otherwise filling in gaps in our service offering, or right, even exploring new ones.
Yeah. So for leaders out there who are facing an acquisition project, or they're going to run into it, maybe like I said, once or twice a year, you're I don't know, I'd say you're probably the guru of procurement M&A projects. If going back into another job at a different pace, or sitting down to coffee for somebody, like your 2 or 3 big learnings, like, hey, your acquisition, the procurement work related to this acquisition is going to go well or much better if you do this, this, and this. Like, what would be your top 3 kind of quick shots on, making an acquisition successful from a procurement perspective?
I mean, the first one to me feels like the easiest to me, and it doesn't cost anything. Can you just be a nice person, right? It's much easier to engage with folks out of the gate. It doesn't cost you anything to be nice. So I think we generally have folks that get along with other people. Yes, you may have to be tough or rigid on a position or a relationship, but I would certainly say start there. I would say consistency in terms of consistency and communication, right? So we have had some programs that have had some longevity here. There's solutions that change within them. Pricing and certainly stakeholder needs may change, but we're fairly consistent in, hey, when we are going to integrate your office, the equipment in your office, your copiers, your mail equipment, etc. This is the information that we need. The COOs, the CFOs, we've been doing this long enough. They know what to get us. They know we're going to be able to come back to them with, okay, here's what the new solution is going to look like. Here's what it's going to cost. Here's the benefits. It's very crisp. It's going to connect in. It will work smoothly with all of our other systems as it relates to the broader integration. And so I think that communication and the consistency of communication has been very, very helpful. I think it's also in a B2B business, you've got to be sympathetic, empathetic to the client supplier relationships, right? If you think about some of the acquisitions we've done where it's one office, 20 people in a market we're not already in, some of these may be more remote locations that, maybe some of the larger suppliers don't have a local offering there, right? Or listen, to cannibalize our business on the revenue side, let's make sure we look at that comparison between what's our margin on the relationship with the client who is also a potential supplier, and then what's the benefit. So we've found ways to meld the two. So there are certain situations with like equipment providers where we will still utilize the model that and our pricing as it relates to our national, or in this case North American regional agreements, but we will work with the supplier to make sure that they use a regional or a local distributor or hands-on service provider to deliver that last mile of service, right? So you've got to be, I think this was another one of those things, leaving Kearney, going into a firm where you had to own the relationships at the end, right? Really thinking about the client side and the supplier side.
Yeah. Super practical. I think you just said something I'm not going to forget. And it hasn't come up on the podcast before in those words. In other words, yes, but the most practical thing is to be a nice person. I love that. And I love that's the number one, because I've been acquired in my career, and there's so much emotion and anxiety and uncertainty. Yeah, absolutely. That's just awesome. So, thank you for that, by the way. And I don't know if you're open to it, but I would just say, Jay is a master M&A project guy now from a procurement perspective. So if you want a master class on this, drop a note to Jay. And
I don't know about that. Happy to talk about it, but again, I would say part of the secret sauce is also having a really great team, and I'm very proud as well of the longevity of the team here.
Yeah. Well, it's such a testament, the growth that you're describing of the broader business, the business success that you're describing reflects, not just procurement, but a cross-functional team and an organization that understands, has a strategy, executing with that from a culture perspective. Yeah, that's very impressive. So I know, personally from different steps in my career and talking to other folks, sometimes procurement has this bit of a glass ceiling feeling to it, right? Like once you kind of climb up into that role, I don't find very many procurement leaders that become the CFO, right? Become the head of operations, or so you've added to your role here this real estate responsibility as well. And I think you said 700 offices.
Yeah,
this is,
and there were like, I think when I started there were like 250 or 300, and we're at 700 something now. And over that same time, I think we've closed or consolidated like 350. So
yeah, I think that it's, many of the people that I know that own facilities, they're managing a tiny fraction of that number of offices, right? When I think about that much of a real estate footprint and just the operational job that surrounds it, it's not sort of like an also own it kind of marginal job. To me, it feels like a huge job in itself.
It's certainly, a full 50% of my time is split between the two functions. I came into Hub having managed a significantly smaller portfolio, but having both functions, procurement and real estate. And as with most roles, and certainly when procurement is gearing up, right, cost savings is always a component of our role and a major component of it. I was just at a meeting with all the portcos associated with one of our private equity owners, and we were talking about, right, requirements and what we're measured on, and right, cost savings was for all of us. So based on some of the experiences I had, where at the beginning of my journey, it was very specific to products and services that either went into building out a space or supported the running of the space. But we were able to show if you make effective leasing decisions, there's a massive cost savings, right? An operating expense benefit associated with that. And some of it was as simple as just establishing, what we like to say, where we started from, getting to best in class wasn't necessary, because we could massively move the needle just by getting 1 foot into the schoolhouse. So we started by establishing some square foot per person targets, right, which said for smaller offices, if we could get to, I think originally it was like anything under 5,000 feet, if you can get to 300 square feet per person or less, that's an improvement. For I think 5 to 10,000, it was 250, and for 10,000 and above, it was 200 square feet per person or less. And if you think about like how much corridor space you need and number of bathrooms and break rooms and things like that, it makes sense that as you get bigger, there are greater efficiencies. And we at the time, what was happening was our legal team was effectively validating that we had an enforceable, duly executed lease, but there weren't people looking at, well, are we in the right spot? Are we paying the right amount? Are we designing the space as effectively as we could? Is our occupancy and utilization of the space aligned with how much space we have? So that was sort of the launching point for us to make a case for savings. We probably don't have enough time to talk about like what happened with COVID and work from home and how we've rethought metrics there. But
you read my mind completely, right? Because the real estate changed so much in the past 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and it continued, right? This is something, again, kind of that excitement that no single day is like any of the previous. Every day something's changing, right? We have certain businesses where a few days in the office works. We have others where no, we need people in their seats. There are certain businesses we run where we do work for banks or financial institutions, and it's more call center type work that those people have to show up. We can't have people at home, right, where they could be screen scraping or jotting personal information down. That's gotta be in-person work. We have other businesses in Canada and even here in the States where we look more like a retail insurance operation, and people will walk in. So you've got to have someone there, right? A sign that says, sorry, working from home today, you've just lost that revenue.
Yeah, that's twofold. You said 50%. I'd say it's fair enough that it's 2 full-time jobs. You must have a strong staff supporting you at the next level to be able to handle that kind of scope and responsibility. I mean, I'm just thinking about managing 700 leases, and just all of the things that go on in that. Did you join Hub with their intention that you were going to run real estate as well, or
no? It was quite interesting. So I had been running real estate and procurement at Orbitz, came over to Hub to run procurement, and at the time we were centralizing some finance and accounting functions that had been vastly distributed. And I think it was the chief accounting officer who was working through a space plan with the local, the person who would ultimately become the local leader of this shared center, as well as the CFO. And I think the chief accounting officer said, hey, didn't that new guy we hire used to do real estate work? Why don't we have him take a look at this? And so it was just, an initial glance at a floor plan, made some suggestions, and, was able to help save some money from a CapEx perspective. And then, I don't know if word got out or what, but we had a very small corporate team at the time. I would say we are certainly not bloated now. But everybody kind of sat together. So as lease questions came up, the same attorneys that I was working with on procurement transactions might ask me a question about that. And as I was, in my first, I don't know, call it first 100 days, first 6 months, and getting out into the field and going out to offices and kind of, eyes on what was happening on the ground, kind of the gears started to churn for me. Like, hey, I think there's a bigger opportunity here, and we can, augment what was initially just a procurement savings target and include some opportunities on the real estate side. And I think we had a target. I don't remember what the number was, but it was a couple of $1 million. And we said, given the fact that most of our leases were 5 to 7 years or 5 to 10 years, we'll hit the target in 7 years. And I think we hit it in like a year and a half or 2 years. And in addition to securing savings, we were able to build out space that was more functional. It was nice space. People enjoyed coming in. They felt like they had, and not just felt like, they did have better technology, right? Better ergonomic solutions, more natural light coming into the space. So, it's been a win all around. And I would say, yes, I've got a small team from a corporate perspective, but we have a great network of, each of those hubs has more like a facility manager type person. And they have local office managers that they rely on, so that, we are not answering every phone call that, hey, Conrad's too warm and Jay's too cold, or the sink is leaking. We're not down at that level. It's more, I would say, lease rationalization, space planning, design, build out, and then kind of the local organizations, the matrix organization. They kind of handle the day-to-day, as well as, they're an integral part of that, a lot of that upfront work.
Yeah. Well, one of my best friends was responsible for facilities at Adobe. I mean, we kind of came into Adobe at the same time. I did procurement and he did facilities, and I've just got a ton of respect and appreciation for how important the workspaces are to the culture, to the performance. I love what you're saying in terms of designing workspace that makes people actually want to be in the office, particularly in the culture that the world that we live in today, where, people have a choice, and, the office being an enabler of my success and, my satisfaction from working, and relationships and community, all those things, just so important. So stepping away from real estate a little bit, I know that one of the hot topics out there that people are dealing with is sort of software inflation, license costs increases, things like that. I imagine as you're doing these acquisitions, you're constantly dealing with, you know, multiple licenses for the same company coming in from acquisitions and things like that. Like, what's your observation of what's happening most right now, and how are you looking at these software price increases? Any advice for the listeners on your experience here? Because again, I think you're probably dealing with this at a volume that many of them aren't.
Yeah, and I think there's two issues, right? So one of them for us, as you alluded to, around the pace of acquisitions, there are certainly some application providers that are very specific to the insurance brokerage industry. And so inevitably, someone's got a license for 20 people. We have a license for 20,000. We buy them. We get them moved. We want them moved over to ours as soon as possible. But right, obviously, the suppliers don't love the fact that their revenue just dipped. However, right, again, there's this benefit of, well, yes, it dipped, but now that 20-person shop is part of a bigger group, and that shop is going to look for, acquisition opportunities on a go forward basis. So that is a challenge, and there are agreements where we've got very specific language on the timing, right? How quickly can we get someone cut over, or if there's more than X amount left on that legacy agreement, within 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, it moves over to our deal. So that's, something we think about and deal with on a case by case basis. I think to your broader question, and I'm curious what you're seeing, but I would say in the last 6 to 12 months, it seems like many of the application providers that had not been operating at a profit think that this is the year they're all going to become profitable and make up for all those years of losses and pass through absolutely absurd increases. Are you seeing the same thing?
Well, for sure, we've kind of come through these few years of inflation that's probably different than normal. Definitely seeing employees. I mean, I'm on the other side of the table from this now, right? So, kind of talking about how how we're digesting these things as a business. Like you've just got all of these forces that are coming to play. So I can absolutely see how. Okay, well, we had this big inflation a couple of years ago. We've kind of, the economy was a little weird coming off the pandemic and these other things. And okay, well, now it's time we actually need to rebalance and do some things. I can see that like everyone would be in that kind of cycle at the same time because they weren't necessarily, you know, there was a lot of talk around the inflation that there was no justification from it. I think some corporations that are more product, raw material focused, kind of had some more justification, but I think some people put it off. I can absolutely see that it would be all hitting in the last year or
Yeah.
two.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
we're seeing it converge. I guess I hope some of our suppliers are listening. Just say no, right? Not to steal that from Nancy Reagan, but that's that's one of the approaches we're taking here. Like we're just saying no. We're not accepting this increase. There have been a few situations where we've taken the nuclear option, and we've told suppliers, listen, we're not accepting this increase, and we're actually going to take your solution out of our environment, right? Like your quantity will go to zero before we accept an increase like this. I think there's a few suppliers that thought we were bluffing, but we've done it. Right. We obviously try and engage in conversation as well. And one of the starting points for me is, listen, you're asking for a 2x price increase. Your product or your service isn't twice as good now as it was yesterday. So where is what's the justification for this? What's changed? I know you're not getting a 20% raise or a 2x raise, right? So help me understand where this is coming from. So there's been a lot of, I would say, soul searching with in response to some of the proposals that we've received, where we have had to, as an organization, ask the tough question. Okay, at what point, when they keep increasing the price, at what point do we make a build versus buy? Or I remember years ago at another company, I think every employee had an eFax license, right? It was an application that if someone faxed you something, it came into your email. And at one point, we just turned it off and said, let's just turn it back on for anyone who asks. And we didn't get a whole lot of requests, right? So there are, I think as an organization, you have to ask yourself, all right, do we truly need this as much as folks are saying they do? There are also some products and services that we will challenge the internal business, especially because we've got so many divisions, many of which sell similar products and services. So how is it that 29 of them can get by without it, but division number 1 over here is insisting this is the absolute critical application that they need?
Competitive advantage to the business or something.
Yeah. It does it. Somebody's wrong. It can't be both. And so, we'll engage with those conversations in order to then help drive what our negotiation strategy would be.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're hitting this enough that you've built out a bit of a playbook in terms of how you're going to, hear the proposal, decide how to approach the request for price increase and respond back to the supplier.
Yeah.
And I suspect that you're finding in most cases a pretty fair level of success, except for those organizations. I mean, it always drove me crazy to work with, on the procurement side with organizations that thought they were the only show in town. Your be a nice person thing, goes a long way on the supplier side as well.
Well, and the other thing I would add to that is, We are constantly pressing our internal stakeholders to think about this much farther in advance than they would otherwise want to, right? Because
Yeah.
nobody's going to legitimately threaten a big ERP provider 2 weeks before the agreement expires that if they don't, right, if they don't increase their discount, right, lower the price, whatever, that that you're going to rip the solution out. They know you can't do that, right? So we're having more and more conversations with our internal stakeholders on, okay, let's work backwards. If that's the magic date, how long would you have to pilot a new solution to be comfortable to pull the plug on your supplier? Right now, back up from that. How long is that the pilot implementation going to take? Now back up from that. How long is the agreement going to take? How long is it going to take us to evaluate which are the right suppliers? And I think that helps to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit on how folks like us think on a daily basis. That, listen, this is not just a knee jerk, right? This isn't like a Goodfellas negotiation. This is a right. You've got to come at this a lot more strategically with a lot more forethought to then still be able to get to the objectives that you're seeking.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just in software, but so many of so many of the providers that we use, time is that good data and time to do something about it is the most important part of that negotiation strategy. Frankly, I think the service providers would relish the fact that they can hand you the renewal proposal a week or 2 or 3 before the date. And
Yeah.
but that doesn't, you have to wait for that, right? If you have good enough data that you can be looking at reports months and months, sometimes even years in advance to decide, what this looks like, it makes all the difference. I suspect many of the software suppliers are kind of giving you, yeah, well, we're building all this AI in here. And so, not necessarily AI as part of like that conversation, but how are you guys looking at AI? I mean, I imagine with these acquisitions, different companies, your own company, it's such a weird thing right now because like there's so much hype about it. I think we're getting into the emergence of the kind of trough of despair or whatever. Like maybe it's more challenging to get value out of it. Within all of that is the questions about data privacy and security and other things. How can we use this? How are you in your organization looking at AI, and how is it enabling your procurement process?
Yeah, so I would say from a procurement, if I take those questions in reverse, from a procurement perspective, we're not using a ton of it just yet. Where I know it is being used on our behalf, we've got a contract ingestion and repository tool, so I know it's being used there. We've got something similar for our real estate leases. As a firm, and I would say even broader, I think many firms are thinking about it this way, and this certainly came from this recent collection of peers of mine at some of these other owned by the same PE parent. It almost feels like the kind of the 3M business case, which was I'm paying you for 40 hours a week, but I want you to spend 5 hours of every week just innovating. Like, whatever your day job is, I don't care. Think about, right, use cases. Think about whether it's your job or something in your personal life, right? How is it that where is a need and how can it be filled? So I think if you look at the variety of what we as a firm do, the various solutions we sell, the clients we engage with, the different risks that they're exposed to, there needs to be kind of a bottom up ideation, right? You kind of need folks closest to the problem to help you solve it, with maybe a governance structure that helps to say, oh yeah, that one makes sense. This one we can or can't do because of regulatory reasons. So you want to create an opportunity for folks to be doing a little bit of trial and error on their own within a contained environment, and then look at how do we scale up. So we actually had there's an internal team that recently put a proposal together on this. So I think we are, if you think about all of the data that we have access to from our clients, as well as our the employees of our clients, as we provide services on the employee benefits side of the house, this is something that we've got to be really, really careful with. And ring fencing is a big issue. So I think that's the direction we're moving in. I've seen some really great use cases from peers of mine outside of my current organization on how they use it for policy drafting, right? And interesting things that you can do in terms of, going back to that just be nice comment, almost like the way you ask AI, some of the interfaces, the way you ask the question will dictate the tone of the response. So there was a peer of mine who was working on I think it was an office policy guidebook. And when he showed us the queries and what was happening and put information in there, like, please add such and such, it changed the tone of the response. So it is interesting. Obviously things around, right, hallucinations or the solutions making stuff up when they don't have an answer, biases that are built into it, those are a little concerning. I think the other thing we're seeing is this is such a new space. Some of these tools are better than others for analytics, for graphics and marketing, right? So I'm not sure that, and many of the firms that are I think a little farther ahead the curve than we are now, many of them are not using a single provider. They've got different solutions, different providers for different solutions. So kind of, again, if I go back to my Carney days, sort of the case studies on day one were, all right, well, if you and 10 of your friends all belong to separate gyms and you get together and negotiate one package deal for all of you, like, here's how much money you save. Really pushing the whole soul sourcing thing. But I think as I've matured and you look at certain solutions and it's got to be the best fit for the case. Right, being comfortable with this is not going to be a one size fits all, and I think the other thing we're seeing is there is rapid, if not daily, changes in pricing models and measurement tools around how pricing and consumption will be governed in these AI solutions, which makes it a little challenging as firms are trying to budget appropriately and not just open up the floodgates on this.
Yeah, we're definitely the early days of what this is going to turn into. Lots of uncertainty. I love your suggestion. On Proc-N-Roll, we always try and be really practical, and I think this idea of a sandbox that's a safe place where people can play and learn and experiment on different aspects of their process. I was talking to somebody yesterday that was actually using a tool, Notebook LM, to analyze RFP responses. I use Notebook LM all the time. I never would have even thought about that application of using Notebook LM as part of an automation scoring in the process. I'm not completely understanding exactly how he's done it yet. I'm gonna actually bring him back onto Proc-N-Roll, and we're gonna go through a show and tell where we just kind of go in, real hands-on workshop detail.
And that, Conrad, I think is, as folks are looking at AI solutions, that statement you just made about show and tell, I find so much more value in, whether it's a webinar or, again, some of these peer-to-peer presentations that I've been able to be a part of. Show me how you're using it, right? Don't talk about it in an ethereal way. Like, I want to touch and feel, what did you do? What information did you give it? How did you ask the questions? What did the output look like? Or show me the steps where you've automated some sort of internal process flow. That to me is a lot more interesting. And it could be just me, but that's what helps get my engine going around. Oh, okay. Now I understand how it works, and now I can think a little bit smarter, more effectively about how I might use it going forward.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. I mean, I go to these conferences like other procurement leaders all the time, and it's so hard to get past like the surface talk that just feels like a bunch of people saying the same words into like, okay, how can I how can I get something practical out of this? So by the way, we had a webinar back, my graphite job, and it was the head of like applied AI from Google that came and spoke on that webinar. I'll send you over the links, and we'll put the links in this podcast here with like, he has like a workbook or a playbook on how to build out, how to write prompts, like things that I had never thought about that actually I'm using every day now, that I found to be quite practical. Well, Jay, this has been like, it's been super great to catch up and talk through these items. Your role and your experience, the volume of M&As, which translates into the, a lot of the licenses, the renewals. Very, very instructive and helpful. One of my favorite questions is to kind of turn the clock back now. So, if you could look back at junior Jay coming out of college and moving into that first sourcing job, like all of the leadership lessons you've learned, the procurement lessons, if you could sort of wind that up into maybe what's the really big gem that you would, try and time travel back and tell yourself?
Probably more of the listening. Right. I mean, even the example we were just talking about, the having someone like, hey, I don't care about the supplier names or the pricing or whatever. Show me what you're actually doing, and I'm just going to listen. And right, I'm going to ask some questions. Even when I think about, go back to, again, kind of sourcing 101, when you're in that data gathering phase, ask your internal stakeholders some probing questions, and then just shut up and listen. Right. And I would say that the same goes with negotiations. The less you talk, the better the outcome is probably going to be. Right. Your counterpart is going to share something that maybe they weren't supposed to, or is kind of peeling back the onion, that one more layer for you that you wouldn't have otherwise had if your mouth was running the entire time.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, you have it there. I'm gonna stitch together what I think are maybe the two coolest and most practical pieces of advice you gave. To quote a great musical, talk less, smile more. Be a nice person, talk less, listen. That's fantastic. Jay, it's really been great to spend time with you. Thanks for taking part of your time to join us on the podcast. For those of you out there, don't forget to comment, question, like, share. It helps everyone to find the podcast. And our goal here, as always, is to give you practical procurement tips, bring you insights from some of the best procurement leaders in the world. And Jay, with your experience here in M&A and this deep real estate, this is really fantastic. Thanks for taking time with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.